This is Donna Miller with Vote Voiced Podcast, and we're here today for another adventure of the Creature of Voter Suppression. You can follow Vote Voice on Instagram, Twitter. We're on TikTok. I have a new a new site, at WordPress for our podcasts. You can go to www.votevoice.com, and we'd love to see you there. I want to thank everyone for their support. I want to thank you for all of your donations. I want to thank you for everything that you do for us by being here. I appreciate your time, and I want to thank you for all your comments, good and bad. I learned from all of them. Well, now we're talking about, again, the Creature of Voter Suppression. There are sweeping changes in the Georgia election law. What did our little Creature of Voter Suppression dine on in Georgia? Well, for starters, they tightened the voter ID requirements for absentee ballots. Then the next course was they shortened the early voting period for runoff elections. Oh, here comes the main course. They limited drop boxes, and then here comes our little wine. They allow states to take over all the local elections. So now the state is going to be running all the local elections. And to top it off, our dessert, there's no food or water in the voting lines. And just for the doggy bag, they are closing all the polls at 5 o'clock. Can you imagine? It's like there's people who do not want anyone to vote. In the state of Michigan, they're gearing up to do the same thing to us. They want to make voting so difficult that you might stop voting at all, and the less people who vote will give you an opportunity to elect someone that people might not want to elect. How can I say that? How can I say that? So basically, the state Senate Republicans in Georgia have passed a bill to end no excuse absentee voting for voters under the age of 65. Okay? They're going to require voter ID for absentee voting. They're going to limit the absentee ballot box drop-offs by requiring that they be located inside of early voting locations and making them only available during regular business hours. So if you are in a position where you have to work all day and a ballot drop-off box is 5 miles away, how are you going to get there if it's never open? People have to work. They're going to standardize early voting days and hours across counties by expanding availability in many small rural counties that are heavily white and conservative, but they're limiting the availability in large counties that are diverse and Democratic leaning. And this will particularly impact the weekend voting days that Black voters are most likely to use, rather than requiring the smaller counties to simply match what the larger ones are already offering. They have banned people from giving food and water to voters waiting in line. So, where is the Jesus in this? You're going to make it illegal for someone to give someone water and food who are standing in a line for 5 or 6 hours, 8 hours. Well, it's going to be what? They have limited the time that the ballots, the voting areas are going to be open. They're going to disqualify voters from voting in the wrong precinct, but in the right jurisdiction unless they show up specifically after 5 p.m. on election day. They're going to allow Georgians to initiate an unlimited number of challengers to voters' ability with a white-wing voter suppression group, unsuccessfully tried to do to tens of thousands of voters last year. They're going to limit the powers of the Republican state Secretary of State. Okay? They're going to shorten the runoff period for federal elections from 9 weeks to 4 weeks and adopt an instant runoff voting for military and overseas voters to ensure that doing so doesn't conflict with federal law when absentee ballots must be available to voters abroad, and require polling places serving certain large precincts to add more voting machines or be split into multiple sites. Okay, what is this likely to do? The new voting restrictions is a response to the narrow losses in the 2020 election cycle that the Republicans felt. Now, President Biden already said it was un-American. And he said something else too. It is unfair play that just because a ball team lost a game to another ball team, that they will never allow that ball team to play in their state again. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the ideal in a Bible Belt state like Georgia, that you're not allowed to be a good Samaritan, that you cannot give water to people? Well, let me tell you something. If anybody from Georgia or any other place, because they're trying to do this even in Michigan, they're getting ready to gear up to send the Creature of Voter Suppression here. We're going to fight that. The Political Engagement Committee of the Western Wayne branch of the NAACP will be having town halls shortly. And there will be plenty of town halls in the future. We need to fight to protect our voting rights. You need to fight to protect your voting rights no matter what state you're in. Because what we're going to have to do, if they cannot turn these these voter suppression laws around, which President Biden said he's going to work on the legislation and he is going to work on getting the information out to voters. So whatever information that comes out of Washington, I will be sharing it, because it puts an undue burden on an American citizen to have to choose between voting and their job. And that's what they're hoping. By closing the polls at 5 o'clock, when everyone is getting off of work, that means that you're going to have to sacrifice. I know people, all of us working people know what that means. If you're dedicated to voting, you're going to have to make a choice between your job and voting. So that means that you're going to have the time if you can. There's plenty of jobs you don't. And what about employers? That means that employers are going to have to fix their schedule to allow people to vote in rotation. And it's going to be, oh my God, so difficult. If you're running a restaurant or a hotel, or you're a caterer, or anything that causes you to serve the people, think about it. That means that the people, the employees, and the employer are going to have to coordinate in order to give people time off to vote. And if there's a long line, what does that mean? How are we going to run our businesses? How are we going to work for a paycheck if we're not allowed to vote or even given the opportunity to vote early, like the polls open up at 7, or to vote later, the polls close at 7 p.m.? This is what they're doing. And if you can't vote absentee, and they're making the rules very stringent, everyone should be able to vote absentee. It doesn't make any sense that voting here in America shouldn't be one of the easiest things that we can do. It is outrageous. You know, America is slowly losing its ability to say anything to anyone about how they conduct their elections. We need to stand up against this. Now let's talk about Michigan. Now, let's see. Michigan's newly formed independent redistricting, districting commission voted unanimously earlier this month to ask the state Supreme Court to extend the state's November 1st deadline for passing new districts. Proposed maps would be available for public comment for at least 45 days before adoption. But because the Census Bureau has delayed the release of key data needed to conduct redistricting until September 30th, it would be impossible for commissioners to meet the mid-September deadline for the start of the public comment period. Okay? Let's see what else is going on. Okay, let's talk about Connecticut. Democrats have passed 2 constitutional amendments in a state house committee, one of which would establish an early voting period determined by future legislation, and the other of which would allow any voter to vote absentee without needing a specific excuse. Every Republican opposed the absentee voting amendment, and only a few backed early voting. Now, what is wrong with being able to vote absentee? Nothing. You know, I guess there's people out there, because it's not every Republican. Not every Republican agrees with these laws. And we're not going to just sit by and lose our right to vote. What they're doing is they're just making it more difficult for us to vote. Now, in Hawaii, the Democratic-run state Senate has unanimously passed a bill to establish automatic voter registration through Hawaii's driver's licensing agency. Both legislative chambers had previously passed versions of automatic registration in 2019, but failed to agree on a single version of the bill. So it's unclear whether 2021 will finally be the year that legislatures send a single bill to Democratic governor for his signature. Okay, everybody, these are things that we're fighting all over the country. All over. In Missouri, the Republican-run state house has given preliminary approval to a bill that would remove the excuse requirement for voting absentee, but also add a requirement that both in-person and absentee voters present an ID to vote. House Republicans previously passed a separate bill earlier this session to revive the state's voter ID requirement after the state Supreme Court gutted it last year. Now, who in Missouri you don't know? Gosh, you would think that in Missouri, of all places, people would know each other. They wouldn't need a state ID to vote. Surely you're voting in your neighborhood. Most people probably in Missouri have probably lived in the same neighborhood. Surely they know each other. We know each other around here. People know each other in a city as big as Detroit. You gonna tell me you don't know each other in Missouri? Now, here's what's happening in New Mexico. 2 committees in New Mexico's Democratic-run state Senate have passed a bill to expand voting access for Native Americans, which include, among other provisions, a requirement that every reservation or other Native community have an in-person polling place. The bill previously won unanimous support in state houses. Lawmakers have limited time to pass the bill ahead of this year's legislative session on Saturday. That sounds like a good thing. I hope it is. That American Indians have a place to vote. Let's talk about Vermont. Now, these are places you usually don't hear about. Democrats and around half of Republicans in the Vermont Senate have approved a bill that would permanently adopt universal mail voting in all future general elections after it was temporarily implemented last November due to the pandemic. The bill would also give voters a chance to fix problems with their mail ballots, such as a signature supposedly not matching the one on file. The GOP governor, Phil Scott, said he supports the bill, but wants it expanded to cover additional elections such as primaries, a move that was previously rejected in committee. Now that's Vermont. Oh ho ho. Let's talk about our creature of voter suppression. In Alabama, state House Republicans have passed a bill along party lines that would ban curbside voting options, making it harder for people with mobility limiting disabilities to vote. It's like they just don't want you to vote. In Arizona, voter suppression. In an effort to deter mail voting in a state where 4/5 of voters regularly vote that way, Senate state Republicans have passed a new voter ID bill along party lines that would require absentee voters to include an affidavit with their birth date and ID card number or their voter registration number and a copy of a utility bill with their ballots. Oh. Okay, in Arkansas, Republican legislators have introduced a bill that would eliminate the final Monday and Sunday of early voting preceding Election Day, setting Saturday as the cutoff. Sunday early voting in many southern states have traditionally been used disproportionately by Black voters and Black churches that organize get out the vote drives after service. They know that people are out, they've gone to church, and on a Sunday they go to vote. Why not? You're out. You're already out there. Why not go vote? Why not? In Florida, with the support of GOP Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican state senators have passed a bill in committee along party lines that would ban absentee ballot drop boxes, that would require absentee ballot requests to be made each election cycle instead of allowing voters to make one request that is good for 2 consecutive election cycles. Retroactively canceling thousands of pending absentee ballot requests for 2022 that were made ahead of the 2020 elections, and required that a voter's mail ballot signature match the most recent signature they've used instead of the more extensive history of their voter signature, with Leon County Election Supervisor Mark Early testified would violate a court mandate from previous litigation. This is what we're dealing with. This is voter suppression. This is what we're talking about at Vote Voiced. And we have to say where the voter suppression is coming from. It isn't partisan if it's happening. Voter suppression is something that voters in America need to fight. And unfortunately, most of the vote, if not all of the voter suppression, is coming out of the Republican Party. I can't help that. This is the fact of voter suppression today in America. And when I tell you about voter suppression, I have to say where it's coming from is right there on its face. In Iowa, Republican Governor Kim Reynolds has signed a major bill making it harder to vote, placing it among the first of a wave of GOP-backed voting restrictions under consideration nationally in response to Republican losses last year. Latino voting advocates immediately filed a lawsuit in state court arguing that the law violates the state's constitution guarantee of the right to vote. This new law will cut the early voting period from 29 days to 20 days, close the polls on election day at 8 p.m. instead of 9 p.m., making it harder for working people and those with children to vote, require mail ballots to be received by officials on election day instead of postmarked by election day and received a few days afterward, which would have disqualified roughly 6,500 ballots in 2020. Ban county officials from mailing unsolicited absentee ballot request forms to all voters. Prevent county officials from mailing absentee ballots to voters more than 20 days before election day, a reduction from the current 29 days. Now, this is happening in Iowa. And a shorter window than in all but 5 states, and bar voters from requesting an absentee ballot less than 15 days before election day instead of the current 10 days. In Montana, voter suppression creature is at work. Republicans have passed a bill out of a state house committee along party lines to enact a stricter voter ID requirement, sending it to the House floor. In a silver lining for voting rights, Republicans stripped out a provision from the bill that would have banned students from using college IDs to register and vote in order to deter a lawsuit. This is what's happening here in America. In New Hampshire, Republicans in a state house committee have voted to retain multiple bills that would restrict voting, particularly among student voters, meaning the measure will no longer be under consideration for the regular 2021 legislative session, but would still be considered again either this year or in early 2020. The bill includes proposals to require voters who lack proper identification to cast a provisional ballot and allow within 5 days to show proof of domicile, which is shorter than the currently allowed 30-day time period. Mandate that voters show identification when delivering absentee ballots to local election officials. Further clarify rules for when a voter loses their domicile and becomes ineligible to vote, and repeal the ability of college students to use their campus address for voting, requiring them to vote at their parents' address, which may not be located in the state. This is terrible. This is what's going on all over our country. Bite after bite after bite. For instance, in Montana, Republicans have passed a bill out of a state house committee along party lines. I'm sorry. I already told you about Montana. Hold on. Wisconsin. Major Republican donor named Farbic has filed a lawsuit asking Wisconsin conservative majority Supreme Court to install several restrictions on voting ahead of the April 6th election for state education superintendent and local offices. This is where they start too, the local offices. His suit aims to ban absentee ballot drop boxes, limit who can turn in someone else's absentee ballot on their behalf, and prohibit local election officials from fixing absentee ballots that are missing information, such as a witness's address, to ensure they count. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the creature of voter suppression at work in our country. And it is up to us, every voting American, to protect our right to vote. Okay, let's not go down in history settling for voter suppression. We must get up and fight it legally. We must get up, and it was going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take a lot of sacrifice to make sure that we vote. If you're in a state and these voter suppression laws stand, we're going to have to fight against these voter suppression laws by voting. And I know that it's difficult, but hopefully employers will help. Other people will help. Employees and employers will work together so that somehow people will be able to vote. We only have one day to vote. And if you can only vote during working hours, what is that going to mean to us? We cannot let our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren wake up with complete loss of their right to vote. That's why we pray that we will have laws stated on the federal level. And you know, I think we all wished that the federal government did not have to make states do right. But we see that without a federal law, there are people in the state that will take away our right to vote just so they can hold office and do nothing. That's why they don't want you to vote. If you vote, you can vote out the slackers. You can vote out the crooks. You can vote out people who aren't doing what they're supposed to do and put somebody in there who's doing their job. Listen, this is Donna Miller, Vote Voiced. I thank you very much for listening. You have a wonderful day. Remember to go to www.votevoice.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We really appreciate your donation. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and everything that you do helps support this podcast and all the work we do to get out and fight the creature of voter suppression. You have a wonderful day. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and go to the new WordPress page for our podcast. You can get information about our podcast there. You guys have a wonderful day. This is Donna Miller once again with Vote Voice Podcast.